In 2007, shooting incidents in Salinas, California jumped 50% in a single year. Ordered by a man locked alone in solitary confinement, 250 miles away. Today we're counting down the 10 most brutal leaders in Nuestra Familia, the prison gang that was born to fight the Mexican mafia and never stopped. They ran drug routes, ordered murders, and controlled entire city blocks, all from inside a cell. Stay until the end. This is what the top of that ladder actually looks like. Hit like. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and if you think this story deserves to be heard. Hit hype. That button only works on mobile, and every tap helps push this video to more people. Let's get into it. Number 10. Sheldon "Skip" Villanueva. In January 2008, inside the day room of a federal penitentiary in Pollock, Louisiana, a man named Sheldon Villanueva stabbed a fellow inmate in the head, eyes, and neck. He walked away. Then he looked back, saw the body still moving, and walked back over to finish it. The whole thing was on camera. Prosecutors would show that footage to juries for the next 8 years. The man he killed was Pete Gutierrez, not an enemy, but a longtime member of Nuestra Familia, the same gang Villanueva had spent his entire adult life serving. Gutierrez had broken the rules. Villanueva handled it personally, which at that point was nothing new. By the 1990s, he was a captain in San Jose, running street-level collections and passing orders down from imprisoned leaders at Pelican Bay. When federal investigators indicted him in 2004 under RICO, the judge had a specific plan. Ship Villanueva to a facility in Louisiana, far enough from California that he couldn't run anything anymore. The organization promoted him to overseer within months. One of 2 people with final authority over all of Nuestra Familia, from inside a federal prison in Louisiana. He communicated through coded letters and monitored phone calls, where every male leader had a woman's name. Andrew Cervantes was Lucy. Alberto Lares was Rosa. Villanueva would call to leave new contact numbers, remind people to look after the children. The FBI was recording every call. It still took years. Then came January 2008, and Pete Gutierrez. After that, Villanueva was charged with first-degree murder and federal racketeering on top of everything else. He received life without the possibility of parole. No appeals left. No transfers to negotiate. Just a permanent address somewhere in the federal supermax system. In 2016, the Department of Justice played that Pollock surveillance footage for a jury in United States versus Cervantes. Not to convict Villanueva, who was already gone, but to show 12 ordinary people what Nuestra Familia actually looks like when it enforces its rules. Villanueva didn't need to be in the room. The video was enough. Number 9. Daniel "Stork" Perez. In 2001, in a federal courtroom in San Francisco, a man from Salinas, California, pleaded guilty to running a criminal enterprise under the RICO Act. His name was Daniel Perez, and he went by Stork. The judge gave him 10 years. What the government did not fully account for was that 10 years inside a California state prison for Daniel Perez was not really a punishment. It was closer to a promotion. Perez grew up in Salinas, the most important city in the Norteno gang economy in Northern California. He moved through Nuestra Familia's ranks by doing what the organization required: violence that proved loyalty, carried out consistently enough to get noticed. By the time he reached Pelican Bay State Prison, the gang had stopped thinking of him as someone who followed orders. Inside the secure housing unit at Pelican Bay, Perez held the official title of General of Prisons, full authority over every regiment inside California's entire state prison system. He approved murder targets, collected taxes from drug operations, and sent orders through tiny handwritten notes called wheelus, pieces of paper hidden inside the body, or passed through lawyers and visitors who either did not know what they were carrying or chose not to ask. When a longtime general named James Conejo Perez became a problem, Daniel Perez supported stripping him of his rank entirely, dropping him to the lowest level in the organization. The 2 men shared a last name, but apparently not much else. In Nuestra Familia, losing your rank does not come with a severance package. It comes with a target on your back. His nickname, Stork, reportedly came from his tall and thin frame. The Stork delivers life. Between 2015 and 2019, well into his 60s, Perez and David Cervantes coordinated murder plots against members they considered threats, including Lorenzo Lencho Guzman and John Shanks Reyna. He was running hits from a cell. The title was General of Prisons. The office was a cage. In October 2024, a federal jury in Oakland convicted Perez on new RICO charges. The evidence included Willas, the same notes he had used for decades to run things from inside. On June 17, 2025, the Department of Justice sentenced him to 10 to 15 additional years on top of what he was already serving. The cell had always been his. He just did not get to choose that part anymore. Number 8. Henry Happy Cervantes. On September 11, 2011, firefighters in Oakland, California, were called to a burning apartment at 3100 Coolidge Avenue. When they put the fire out and went inside, they found 2 bodies. John Gilbert Navarrete was 73 years old. Renee Washington was 56 years old. The medical examiner later confirmed that both had been stabbed multiple times before the fire was set. Someone had poured gasoline on them first. Henry Cervantes had done the stabbing. His nickname was Happy. What is worth noting about Navarrete is that he was not an innocent bystander. He was a paroled killer, a man with his own history of violence who had recently been released from prison. Henry walked into his apartment and killed him anyway, without apparent difficulty. That detail does not make the crime worse. It just tells you something about the man who did it. Right after killing them, Henry picked up the phone and called Jaime Cervantes. He told Jaime to bring something to clean up the apartment. In the language they used, clean up meant gasoline. Jaime drove over, poured it on the bodies, and lit the place on fire. The FBI's indictment made clear that Jaime was not simply an errand runner who happened to be available. He was a street soldier for Nuestra Familia, the kind of man who does what he is told, without questions, precisely because not asking questions is how you prove your loyalty to a general. The official record says Henry's motive was that he believed the 2 victims had done something to harm his sister. That framing came from his defense attorneys, who argued it as part of a broader portrait of a man damaged by trauma. According to FBI documents, the actual motive was more transactional, a dispute over money and drug territory in Oakland. Henry believed the victims had interfered with the criminal operations he was running. His drug supply lines, his revenue, his turf. The sister was mentioned at sentencing. The drugs were mentioned at trial. By the time he killed Navarrete and Washington, Henry was running Nuestra Familia's street operations across Oakland. He was 48 years old. He had already served 6 years on a racketeering conviction and had been out of federal prison for about a year. His orders came from Andrew Mad Dog Cervantes, who was sitting in a federal prison in Pennsylvania. The 2 men shared a last name but were not related. The FBI had been listening. What made it difficult was that Andrew and Henry had worked out a system. When Andrew called from inside to direct operations on the outside, they spoke in code. Andrew's alias was Lucy. Instructions about drug routes, territory disputes, and enforcement were delivered as Lucy checking in on the kids. The wiretaps eventually unraveled all of it. Andrew gave the orders. Henry carried them out. Andrew received 36 years at sentencing. Henry got 75. There is probably a lesson somewhere in there about who actually has to show up. The trial concluded on December 21st, 2016, nearly 6 years after the murders. Judge Yvonne Gonzales Rogers at the federal court in Oakland sentenced Henry to 900 months in federal prison. He was 52 years old. Jaime Cervantes, who had no part in the stabbing, drove over with a gas can after one phone call from Henry. He got 32 years. At sentencing, Henry's lawyers raised his PTSD, learning disabilities, and the fact that his sister had died by suicide at age 12 when Henry was 17. The jury had already weighed in on all of that. His name was Happy. In the world he came from, Chicano gang culture, Norteno street hierarchy, nicknames like that are often ironic. Happy was what they called him because he never smiled. He had the kind of face that stayed flat and cold when he was doing what the gang required of him. The name was the joke. Nobody ever explained it in court. Number 7. Robert Babo Sosa. In 1965, at the Correctional Training Facility in Soledad, California, a group of Latino inmates got tired of being pushed around by the Mexican mafia. They started Nuestra Familia as a way to protect themselves. Robert Babo Sosa was one of the founders. He also ended up running the whole thing. Sosa became the first general-elect of Nuestra Familia. From that position, he did something most gang leaders never bother with. He wrote a constitution. Not a rough list of rules scribbled on a napkin. An actual structured document with ranks, responsibilities, and punishments for breaking the rules. He wrote it hidden inside legal mail and letters to his lawyers, so prison staff wouldn't find it. Then he used that same document to sign off on executions from inside his cell at Folsom and San Quentin. The Constitution wasn't just rules. It was the paper trail for every kill order he issued. When Sosa wanted someone dead, the order traveled down through the ranks and landed on whoever was closest to the target. No phone calls, no meetings, just a written instruction buried in legal correspondence, and then someone stopped breathing. At some point, Sosa's own brother, also a Nuestra Familia member, violated the organization's rules. Defection, most likely. Sosa approved the execution order himself. His brother was killed. Sosa used it as a lesson for everyone else. Loyalty to the Familia came before blood. The man didn't make exceptions, not even for family. Especially not for family. Standing directly beside Sosa through all of this was a man named Death Row Joe Gonzales, his second general and the closest thing the organization had to a co-founder of its violence. Gonzales wasn't just an enforcer. He and Sosa built the command structure of Nuestra Familia together. When Sosa issued an order, Gonzales made sure it happened. On the outside, Sosa controlled the San Diego regiment, giving the gang direct access to drug suppliers across the Mexican border. He also ran Santa Barbara, his hometown. When Sureño Cruz tried moving into Northern California territory, Sosa ordered coordinated attacks on their leaders. Targeted hits designed to send a clear message about where the border was. Locals eventually started calling Santa Barbara Santa Bruta. The nickname was earned. Then in 1999, the organization found out Sosa had taken more than $100,000 from the gang's own fund. Money meant to support members inside and help people getting out. He denied it and refused to hand over financial records. The gang impeached him, which is a word you don't usually associate with prison gangs. But here we are. NF then issued a kill order with his name on it. Sosa survived only because federal authorities transferred him before the organization could finish the job. He was convicted in federal court and sentenced to 20 years. The man who wrote the rules ended up losing by them. Number 6. Cornelio "Corny" Tristan. In 2003, from inside a concrete cell at Pelican Bay State Prison in California, a man named Cornelio Tristan sent a handwritten note to a guy named John Mendoza, telling him to set up a drug operation in San Jose. The note was tiny, written in code, and smuggled out through a prison visit. Mendoza did exactly what he was told. Within months, his crew was moving between 60 and 70 pounds of methamphetamine every month. Tristan never left his cell to make any of that happen. He was born around 1961 in Northern California. At 16, he was accused of killing a taxi driver in Woodland, California. He was sent to a juvenile detention facility called DVI. While inside, he was accused of stabbing another inmate more than 100 times. Witnesses changed their stories before trial. He walked. That pattern, the violence, the charges, the witnesses going quiet, would repeat itself for the next 4 decades. By the time he reached adulthood, Tristan had climbed to the very top of Nuestra Familia, sitting on its ruling council as one of 5 generals. His job was to make decisions. Other people's job was to carry them out. From inside Pelican Bay, he used tiny handwritten notes called Wheelas, smuggled through visits to send orders to the streets. In 2003, he told Mendoza to build a regiment in San Jose. A quarter of the profits from that operation came back into the prison system. Tristan's wife collected the payments in person. At one point, she received $80,000 in cash from Mendoza directly. He also used those same notes to deal with people who stopped being useful. Miguel Miquio Castillo, one of his own underbosses, was reportedly ordered killed on Tristan's instructions from inside his cell. The federal government ran a 7-year investigation called Operation Black Widow. In April 2001, a 31-page indictment named Tristan as responsible for at least 5 murders and 10 murder conspiracies, all directed from Pelican Bay. In September 2004, Tristan pleaded guilty to 2 murders. He did not do it because he felt remorse. He did it because pleading guilty kept him off death row. Even his confession was a business decision. He was transferred to ADX Florence in Colorado and spends 23 hours a day alone in a concrete cell. While he was being processed there, David Cervantes took over in California and demoted every one of Tristan's loyalists to the lowest rank in the organization. Tristan spent decades building that. Cervantes dismantled his part of it in about a week. 5. Joseph Death Row Joe Gonzales. In 1965, at a rail yard in Oxnard, California, a 24-year-old man named Joseph Gonzales stabbed another man to death during a robbery. The victim's name was Jesus Ontiveros. A jury found Gonzales guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced him to death. He never made it to the execution chamber. The sentence was later reduced to life with the possibility of parole. So instead of dying, Gonzales went to prison and got to work. Inside San Quentin and Folsom, he rose through the ranks of Nuestra Familia and eventually became first captain, the number 2 position in the entire organization, directly beneath Commander Robert Babo Sosa. Together, they didn't just run the gang. They wrote the rule book, literally. Gonzales is credited as one of the primary authors of Nuestra Familia's Constitution, the document that turned a loose collection of prison fighters into a structured criminal organization. He wrote Article 2 himself. It established an automatic death sentence for any member who tried to leave. No appeals, no exceptions. You joined for life, and if you tried to walk away, the organization would end yours. Between 1973 and 1977, investigators connected Gonzales to at least 11 deaths, a combination of witness killings and internal purges. He directed these operations from his prison cell, passing handwritten orders in tiny script through inmates being transferred between facilities. The green light list, the roster of people approved for killing, had 230 names on it at one point. On October 21, 1977, his men drove a white station wagon to Virginia Street in Bakersfield with 2 .22 revolvers and orders to kill a dropout named Chalo Hernandez. Chalo wasn't home. 2 other people were shot instead. Then, at some point after all of that, Joseph Gonzales became an informant. The man who wrote the death sentence for deserters testified in federal RICO proceedings against his own leadership. By the definition of the rule he personally authored, he had earned execution. He is 84 years old. He is still in prison. In 2024, his case was being reviewed under laws protecting people who committed crimes as young adults. Gonzales was 24 when he killed Jesus Ontiveros. The last man standing from that era is waiting to see if the state will let him go home. Number 4. Gerald Cuete Rubalcaba. On April 19, 1999, in a quiet suburb of San Jose, California, a man named Robert Viramontes was tending his garden when 2 gunmen walked up and shot him dead. Viramontes wasn't a cop. He wasn't a rival. He was a former gang member who had left the life and was trying to be normal. That's what got him killed. The order came from inside Pelican Bay State Prison, from a man sitting in a windowless cell with no phone, no computer, and no direct contact with the outside world. That man was Gerald Rubalcaba. His nickname was Cuete, Spanish slang for a handgun. Rubalcaba was a general in Nuestra Familia, a prison gang that started in California in 1965. By the time he reached the top, the gang had expanded into drug trafficking and contract murder across Northern California. Rubalcaba wasn't the guy pulling triggers. He was the guy deciding whose name went on the list. He passed orders through tiny handwritten notes, sometimes encrypted, moved through lawyers, prison visitors, and regular mail. Viramontes died because he left the gang. Not because he was dangerous. He wasn't anymore. But because if one person could walk away and live, others might try. It wasn't personal. It was policy. Another man, Sal Castaneda, was executed near Castroville for refusing to kill his own brother, who had also left the gang. After the shooting, the killers arranged Castaneda's hands into the shape of the number 14. The 14th letter of the alphabet is Inte-Ian. For Norteno, then Rubalcaba went further. From his cell, he ordered the assassination of 2 assistant district attorneys in Santa Clara County. He wasn't just running a gang anymore. He was declaring war on the government. That's when the FBI launched Operation Black Widow. In September 2004, Rubalcaba pleaded guilty. A year later, he was sentenced to life in federal prison with no possibility of parole. Here's where it gets legally strange. Under California law, you cannot transfer someone serving a state life sentence to the federal system. To make it happen, Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger had to formally commute Rubalcaba's state sentence first. He signed it. Rubalcaba left California for good. He ended up at ADX Florence in Colorado, the federal supermax. He was later transferred to USP McCreary in Kentucky. Gerald Rubalcaba died in 2023 at age 68 inside a federal medical facility. He never walked free. Number 3. James Tibbs Morado. In January 2005, a 20-year-old woman named Crystal Nenque left a Chuck E. Cheese restaurant in Salinas, California, got into her car, and was never seen alive again. By morning, she was found slumped over her steering wheel on Hecker Pass Road, engine still running. The reason she was killed, according to a message intercepted from prison, she was no longer functioning. The man believed to have ordered her death was her common-law husband, James Tibbs Morado, a general in the Nuestra Familia prison gang, who at the time was sitting in a cell at Oakland Jail, waiting on federal proceedings. Morado had been locked up for years, but that didn't slow him down much. He ran his operation from the security housing unit at Pelican Bay State Prison, where inmates are kept in concrete rooms 22.5 hours a day with no windows. From there, he passed orders written in tiny handwriting on thin scraps of paper, folded small enough to hide anywhere. Those notes directed drug deals, assigned hits, and collected money from gang members on the outside. He required every associate to hand over 25% of whatever they made from drugs and extortion. The gang used that money to pay lawyers, support imprisoned members' families, and keep the whole operation running. Crystal's job was to carry messages she thought were love letters. What she didn't know was that a federal task force was already watching her, tracking every visit she made to Oakland Jail, recording her calls. When street members of the gang realized how closely the feds were following her, she stopped being an asset. She became a problem. To Morado, that was the end. Morado was charming in the way that made people forget what he actually was. People in the courtroom described him as relaxed, almost friendly, even when he was chained to the floor. Younger gang members treated him like a celebrity. That charm was real. It just didn't apply to people who stopped being useful. In 2004, Morado took a plea deal rather than risk the death penalty. He was 57 years old. He admitted to running a criminal enterprise and to his direct role in at least 2 murders. He got life with no chance of parole and was transferred to ADX Florence in Colorado. He is still there. The gang he spent years building kept going without him. Number 2. James Conejo Perez. On June 17, 2025, in a federal courtroom in Oakland, California, the general of prisons of Nuestra Familia was wheeled in on a wheelchair. His name was James Perez. His nickname was Conejo, Spanish for rabbit. He was in his 70s, visibly frail, his health broken after decades inside California's harshest prisons. The man who had once controlled every Nuestra Familia operation in the state's entire correctional system couldn't walk into the room where he was going to be sentenced. Perez held a seat on the general council. 7 men who ran Nuestra Familia from the top. His specific role was general of prisons. That meant every appointment, every order, every killing inside the California Department of Corrections went through him. Not suggestions, orders. For over 20 years, He issued those orders from a cell in Pelican Bay's security housing unit, a room the size of a parking space, near total isolation. He communicated through wireless. Tiny handwritten notes passed through whatever gap the institution hadn't closed yet. The system was supposed to make men like him disappear. It didn't work on Perez. In 2015, he and the General Counsel approved the murder of Lorenzo Guzman, a former member suspected of cooperating with law enforcement. Guzman fled to Mexico. The order stayed open. That same year, Perez authorized attempted killings of Antonio Villagrana and John Muscus. Both survived the first attempt. The orders didn't expire. He also ran the San Mateo Regiment directly, overseeing drug distribution, extortion, and money laundering across one of the wealthiest counties in California. General of prisons and street-level commander at the same time, from the same cell. The federal trial ran 12 weeks in 2024, 50-plus witnesses, recorded phone calls, former members describing under oath how Perez approved green lights from solitary confinement. All 7 members of the General Counsel were convicted. Judge Yvonne Gonzales Rogers sentenced him to 120 months, 10 years federal time. The man who spent 20 years ordering executions from a 6x9 cell ended his criminal career being pushed into a courtroom in a wheelchair. The rabbit had nowhere left to run, and not enough left to walk. Number 1. David D.C. Cervantes. In 2007, shooting incidents in Salinas, California jumped 50% in a single year. The man responsible was sitting alone in a solitary cell at Pelican Bay State Prison, 250 miles north. He had been locked up since the 1970s, convicted of first-degree murder in Southern California, and sentenced to life. His name was David Cervantes. Most people in Salinas had never heard of him. He joined Nuestra Familia after entering the California prison system and spent more than 2 decades inside the security housing unit at Pelican Bay, a place designed to cut people off from the outside world. For Cervantes, it became headquarters. In 2004, the 5 top leaders of Nuestra Familia were transferred to a federal supermax in Colorado, leaving a power vacuum at Pelican Bay. Cervantes was one of 3 men who stepped in to fill it. By 2008, he was the only one. The other 2 were quietly demoted to the lowest rank in the organization. No confrontation, no gunfire, just a reclassification. He had removed 2 generals without leaving his cell. To make it official, Cervantes wrote a new constitution for the gang in 2007. One clause stated that the top leader had to be physically located inside Pelican Bay's solitary unit. That single sentence made every rival in Colorado ineligible by rule. It was not a power grab, it was a residency requirement. The same year, he issued a written order to clear Sureños off the streets of Northern California. Shootings in Salinas jumped 50%. The order traveled through coded messages and contraband phones smuggled in by visitors. It never required him to leave his cell, which was also how he got caught. FBI agents secretly intercepted the signal from smartphones being smuggled into Pelican Bay and recorded his calls directly. For decades, Cervantes had communicated through handwritten coded notes. Then he started making direct calls to coordinate drug shipments and order the killing of Lorenzo Guzman in 2015 and John Reyna in 2019. Those calls were recorded. They were played for the jury. In October 2024, after a 12-week trial in Oakland, a federal jury convicted him. On June 17, 2025, Judge Yvonne Gonzales Rogers sentenced him to 10 additional years in federal prison. He was 76 years old. He had already served nearly 48 years on the original murder conviction. 50 years of discipline, undone by a phone call. Every single man on this list died in prison, is still in prison, or is waiting to die there. Combined, they're serving thousands of years in federal custody. Nuestra Familia gave them rank, power, and a title. It just forgot to mention the address was permanent. If someone's selling you a seat at that table, look at where the men at the top actually ended up. That's all 10. Like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.